In terms of the learning objectives, we'll start with discussing session management. We'll explain listeners in Java Enterprise Edition and filters. Let's start with session management. Here we'll talk about stateless web applications, stateful web applications, and session management and its types. We have learned that web applications are stateless by default since the given protocol, that is HTTP, is also a stateless protocol, which means it does not maintain any state. What is state? Let's assume that we visit a website. Now by default, we cannot expect the website to remember the information that we have entered into the web page when we close the web page and we next visit it at a later date. Hence, a programmer is expected to do some specific configuration and programmatic changes to the application so that the application can remember the information that the user last provided to the web page. It does not allow or provide data access to previous requests during the processing of current request in the servlet or JSP page. In a stateless web application, there is no way to preserve client data across multiple requests. So step 1, the client sends a request to the server. Step 2, the server receives the request. Step 3, the server responds to the client with some information, and step 4, the server closes the connection. And that is where the server will lose any information the client has entered into the server. Going forward, if you need to set up a fresh connection to the server is not expected to remember any information that you last provided to the web application. That is the default behavior of the HTTP protocol. A stateful web application, on the other hand, can remember or use the data of the previous request during the processing of the current request, and hence is termed as a stateful web application. In Servlet API, there are different ways of making web applications stateful so that it remembers client data across requests from the same browser. Making web applications stateful is known as session tracking or session management. So step 1, the client connects to the server. Step 2, we create a connection. Step 3, we get a response, and the server identifies the previous request state through session management. So the server knows that the last time the client connected to the server, this is the information that was available, and that information is provided back to the client. The server then closes the connection. Session management is a mechanism used by web containers to store information or session information for a particular user. The session is a conversational state between client and server, and it can consist of multiple requests and responses between the client and the server. Sessions are used for maintaining user-specific state, including persistent objects. The user session refers to a series of user application interactions that are tracked by the server. Types of session management. We have hidden form field, we have URL rewriting, we have cookies, and we have HTTP session. So let's explore the types of session management. The first is the hidden form field. When the server sends a response for one particular request, it sends one hidden field attached to it. The client gets the response with one hidden field, and in the hidden field, the name and value is set as a key pair value. If the same page sends the request the next time, the server can recognize it by getting the parameter of the hidden field. So here is the syntax: input type equal to hidden field, name equal to the key, and value equal to the value. One of the limitations of a hidden form field is that it requires extra form submission on each page. So here we have a browser with a form of a name and address. We send a request. Moment we send the request, it hits a servlet. The servlet then sends a hidden field and name as an attribute, and that hidden field with name and attribute is stored along with the HTML page in the client browser. When we send a request again to the servlet can get that hidden field information and retrieve it. The second option is URL writing. In URL writing, one token is appended to the URL itself as part of the address bar. This token contains one name and one value as a key pair, with the help of hyperlink, the token's name and values are passed to the server. A name and a value is separated using an equal to sign. A parameter name value pair is separated from another using the ampersand. So here we see name 1 equal to value 1. This is one key pair. The ampersand symbol separating the second key pair value. URL writing works with hyperlinks and sends text information. So here we see the browser sending a request to the servlet, and the moment the user enters some data into the page, the second request that goes, the URL is modified with the key pair value. So here you have the name and the value with the second set of name and value. The third option of storing state and doing session management is a cookie. The Servlet API provides javax.servlet HTTP cookie class to maintain session. This class extends object class and implements clonable interface. While creating a cookie, a small amount of information is sent by a servlet to a web browser, saved by the browser, and later sent back to the server. Cookie has a name, value, and optional attribute. The browser returns cookies to the servlet by adding fields to HTTP request headers. The cookie has the following information: the name of the cookie, the value, the comment, the maximum age, which is the duration after which the client should not send the cookie back to the server, the domain to which the cookie should be sent, the path, and specifies if the cookie should be sent via the secure HTTPS protocol. So the client sends a request to the server. The server responds along with a cookie. So a cookie is a small file that ships along with the request back to the client, and on the next communication that happens between the client and the server, the cookie is sent along with the client back to the server. The code to construct a cookie with a specific name and value: we have the cookie constructor, which takes the value and the name as a key pair. The cookie class has the following methods: get name, that gets the name of the cookie; get value, that gets the value of the cookie; set max age, to set maximum age of the cookie; and set value, to set value to the cookie. Here we create an object of cookie with the name and the value. We add the cookie to the browser response by saying response.add cookie, so that the cookie information is stored on the client machine. To retrieve the cookie, we create an array of type cookies and we call the getCookies method. We iterate over the array and we print the name and the value that is stored on the client system. The limitations of the cookies are that all data for a session are kept on the client. Hence, corruption, expiration, or purging of cookies can result in incomplete, inconsistent, or missing information. Cookies may not be available for many reasons. The user may have disabled them, the browser version may not support them, or the browser may be behind a firewall that filters cookies, and so on. HTTP session is the fourth option. This is an interface which provides a way to identify one user across more than one page. The servlet container uses this interface to create a session between HTTP client and HTTP server. Servlet can view and manipulate the information about servlet. HTTP session has a method called getSession. The getSession method gets the current valid session associated with this request if create is false, or if necessary it creates a new session for the request. These are the set of methods available on HTTP session. GetMax inactive interval, which returns the maximum time interval in seconds that the servlet container will keep this session open. GetID returns a string containing unique identifier assigned to the session. SetMax inactive interval, which specifies the time in seconds between the client requests before the servlet container will invalidate this session. Invalidate terminates the session and unbinds any objects bound to it. GetSession returns the current session associated with the request. GetSession with a bool create returns the current HTTP session. If no current session create is true, it returns a new session. So here the client browser sends a request to the servlet. The servlet creates a HTTP session object and sets a key pair value as an attribute, and on the subsequent request that comes from the client to the servlet checks if that attribute value exists in the session object. It retrieves the value and sends it back to the client browser. Let's look at a small demo on session management in servlets. Let's go to Eclipse. Now, to summarize what we covered, HTTP is a stateless protocol, and hence if we have a wizard based navigation where we have a series of pages where we are passing data between pages, and finally on the last step of the navigation or the wizard we would want to save that data into a database. Now, HTTP being a stateless protocol, as we discussed, it cannot carry such information from one page to the other. It's only the browser's history object which keeps track of the forward and backward links in our page. Hence, to share data between pages, we need session management. Now, session management has 4 techniques. We saw hidden form fields, which requires a lot of GUI and code, also slows down performance. URL rewriting, where we have to manually rewrite and modify the URL of every page so that we can store information in the address bar. Cookies, which are stored on the client side. You cannot use it to save passwords, etc., because it's not secure. It can also be disabled by the client browser. Finally, HTTP sessions, which creates a unique session ID. It's server-side storage, and the data that you store in a session can be shared across pages of the current session that the user is interacting with the web server. Now, we have 3 types of scopes when we work with Servlet. We have the request, the application, and the session scope. So, events that occur between login and logout process of our website is called a session. So, the moment we connect with a web server, the web server creates a unique session ID, assigns it to the client, and identifies that particular client by that unique session ID. And we can also track the login or logout time for the user. Simple example would be that when we go to a net banking website, and if we do not interact with it within the specified timeout interval, the session would expire and we are redirected to the login page again. So, let's look at how do we do session management. We'll create a web project and we'll call it session demo. Set the version to 2.5 so we can create a web config file. We'll create a new HTML file in the web content. We'll call it 1.html since we want to simulate a wizard kind of an interface. We'll create a simple form with an action equal to first servlet and method equal to post. So, we'll be creating this servlet. Later on, we'll say enter first name, input type equal to text, name equal to fname. We create one more input text box which says input last name, and we'll change this to lname. A submit button, input type equal to submit, value equal to next. We'll add another HTML page since we are creating a wizard. Now this will be 2.html. We'll change the title to second. I'll use the form code, paste it into the second form, and here we'll say enter the age, type will be number, name will be age, enter email, type will be email, should be number, and name will be email, and the submit button would remain the same. We'll add a third HTML page. We'll call it 3.html. This would be the final page in the wizard. We'll change the title to third. Paste the same code and change the fields to contact and city. So we've changed the field name to contact and city. Finally, on the SRC folder, we'll create a new package. We'll name the package as com. As a convention, it always helps to create a separate package for our servlet. We'll add our servlet, which is first servlet. We'll say next. Next again. And here, like we've been doing in the past, we'll select service and deselect post and get and finish. Now, if you look at the page 1, the 1.html page, it posts to first servlet when I click on the submit button. When I go to the second form or the second HTML page, we'll make this post to second servlet, and the third HTML form we'll make this post to summary servlet. So there are three different servlets that each HTML page will post to, and we will see how we can collect the data from each and every HTML page and summarize it into the final page and print it in the last servlet. Now we are accepting individual values from the user like first name, last name, and here let's change this to contact city, okay, and here age and email. Now instead of storing using session storage individual values like this, it will make more sense to store these values as an object of a class. So we'll create a plain old Java class, a Pojo, a plain old Java object, and we will map these variable names as data members inside that object, so we can retrieve these values, store it into a object of a class, and persist that object using session management. So we'll right click on the SRC folder and create a new package called data transfer object or DTO, and within this package we'll add a new class. We'll name this class as user, and we'll add the following code to this class. So we need a first name. This is the information that we were retrieving from the text boxes. Last name, email, city, contact, that will be of type long for a telephone number, and integer age. So this was the data that we were accepting as text boxes. We've created a separate class to store it, and we will create a constructor, default constructor, which is always a best practice when you create a custom class. I'll right click here, select source and select generate getters and setters, select all and OK. So it generates a get and a set for every variable that we created, which is first name, last name, email, age, contact and city, and we save this class. We'll right click and what we would want to do is we will say generate toString so that it overrides the toString method and prints all the values available in the class. So here you see it prints first name, last name, email, age, contact and city. This code was auto generated for us, which is very helpful. So it overrides the default toString method and returns all these values on the object of this class. Now let's go to the first servlet, and here we'll import the DTO package dot star. Okay, we'll add it to the end of our stack. So we've imported the DTO package, and within it we have our user class. Now we are interested in the service method. So here let's create an object of the user class, an object of HTTP session request dot get session. We'll import the required package. We'll set the first name by getting the value from the text box that the user enters. So we'll say get parameter fname. So the value that is entered in the text box is stored, and we want to store the last name, so we'll also get the last name value. Using the HTTP session object, we will call the setAttribute method, where we'll create a unique key, and the value to be stored in the session will be the user object itself. Once this is done, we simply send redirect and redirect the user to the second page in the wizard, which is 2.html. Okay, so we create an object of type user, we create a session object, we store the data in the text boxes that the end user is entered into the setName and LName function using the setters. We store that object into the attribute variable of session object so that it gets stored with the key user, and we navigate to the second page, which is 2.html. Now we'll add another servlet. This servlet will have the name of second servlet. Again, we'll just have the service method and finish. We'll use the code that we had added here, paste it into the second servlet service method, and here we'll pass false to this constructor, indicating that we don't want to create a new session, but the session that was started from the first file, which is the first servlet started the session. We are getting a reference to that same session that is started in the first step of the wizard when the 1.html file posted to the first servlet. So now we need to check if the session is not equal to null. That means an active session exists. Okay, the moment an active session exists, we need to get a reference to it. So we'll create the object u and retrieve the existing user object that is there in that session. So we'll say get attribute, we'll pass the key which is user, and we'll typecast that object as type user so that we are type safe, and store it inside u. We'll now set which are there in the second HTML page. So the user will enter these values into the text boxes. We will retrieve it and we will store it into the same particular object which is u. We'll have to convert this into an integer since we had given age as an int value. So we convert this to an integer, store the value from the text box email into the object u, and age also into the same object, right? So here we are connecting to the same session that is created in the first servlet. We are checking, is that session not null? If not null, we retrieve the user object that is already stored in the session by giving the key, update the additional 2 parameters from the text boxes which is in the page 2, that is the second part of the wizard. Again, set the updated user object into the session with the same key, and this time we will redirect to the last page of the wizard, which is 3.html. So this is how the pages will be maintaining the state and moving from one page to the other. We'll add the final servlet, which is the summary servlet, which is relevant for page 3.html. Again, we will select the service method. We'll go to the second servlet. Okay, I'll just remove the declaration again because we've already declared this as a user object. So we'll just go ahead and assign it to the value that comes from the session. Okay, alternatively I could have also got rid of this and created the user object here itself. Now I'll just pick up this code, paste it into the summary servlet. So here as well we want to continue with the same session that was created in the first servlet. So I pass false and get a reference to the same session. We check if the session is not null, we get a reference to the user. Now we'll have to set the city which is on the third form, and we'll have to set the contact information. We'll remove the %, and replace with long dot parse long, because that was a telephone number which is a long value, and replace this with contact. Now once this is done and the object is updated, we'll create a print writer object equal to response dot get writer out dot print line. We'll try and print the values that we retrieved. So we'll say hello plus user object dot get email. So we'll retrieve the email plus close the h2 tag. We'll copy this. Let me add the print writer imports on the top. And we'll print the details. So we just need to print the object u because we had overridden two strings, so it will retrieve all the values for us. And maybe we'll print this in an h3, in an h4. We'll go and print the session ID that we were speaking about. So session ID is session object dot get ID, and we'll also attempt to print session created at session dot get creation time. So this will tell us what time the session actually got created, and before that we will print the session ID. Post that we will destroy the session object, very similar to when the user logs out from the website. We will call the invalidate function, which will invalidate the session. We'll now go to the one.html page. Hit a Control F11. We'll just ensure the session demo is published on the server. And it says enter first name and last name. So we say Amit and Kumar, and we move next. The next step is checking for the age and the email. So we enter some age and email, and the final step of the wizard says give me a contact number and a city. And here you see the entire object printed. Hello Amit at gmail.com, username, last name, email, age, contact, and city. So this information was stored into the session object and retrieved. You see the session ID, and you also see the session creation time, that is the timestamp. So this shows us how we have saved the data into the session. So the first file posted to first servlet, this is where we created the session. We saved some data into it. The second file we trapped data and we posted to the second servlet. The second servlet used the same session object, retrieved the user information stored inside, updated it, and pushed it back into the session, and that's what we retrieved on the final step and simply printed it out. So this showed us how do we actually store session information and retrieve it across various pages in our web-based application with servlets.